The rain came down hard that night, the kind that blurs city lights into streaks of gold and white, like the world itself is crying but trying not to be seen. I stood across the street, collar up, hands in my coat pockets, watching her building. It wasn't a bad place. Not luxury. Not cheap. Just expensive enough to pretend everything was fine. Her apartment lights were on. Laughter drifted out through an open window on the third floor. Music too. Loud. Careless. The sound of people who believed the future belonged to them. I crossed the street slowly, shoes splashing through shallow puddles, every step deliberate. Tonight was the night she made it official. I knew because someone had sent me the invite, accidentally, they claimed later. A group chat message meant for others, not me. Celebrating her freedom tonight, Party Popper finally dropped the broke ex face with tears of joy. The message ended with laughing emojis. Plural. I stopped under the awning near the entrance and looked up at the building again. My reflection stared back at me through the glass doors, tall, calm, unremarkable. No suit. No watch worth mentioning. No sign of the truth. To anyone watching, I looked like a man who'd already lost. Inside, the party was in full swing. I didn't need to go up to know what they were saying. I'd heard it all before. He was nice, but he just didn't have ambition. She deserves better. At least she's finally dating real men now. Men with louder voices, bigger promises, more visible success. Men who looked rich. I turned away from the door and stepped back into the rain. That's when my phone vibrated. Not a text. Not a call. A confirmation alert. Rent payment successful, amount $4,200, recipient Third-Party Property Management LLC. On time. Like always. I stared at the screen for a moment as rain soaked through my coat. They were upstairs celebrating her escape from me. And I was still paying the roof over her head. 5 years earlier, none of this would have surprised me. Back then, I believed love meant staying quiet. That loyalty didn't need applause. That dignity mattered more than recognition. What I didn't know was how cruel people become when they think you're powerless. A car pulled up to the curb behind me, black, silent, expensive. The engine barely made a sound. The driver didn't honk. Didn't rush me. He waited. I opened the back door and stepped inside. Leather seats. Soft lighting. Privacy glass. Home, sir? The driver asked. I nodded. As the car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of her window. Silhouettes dancing, arms raised, glasses clinking. They had no idea. No idea that the man they mocked that night controlled assets worth more than the entire block they were standing on. No idea that my name was already on buildings they walked past every day. No idea that the only reason they felt safe laughing was because I had chosen silence. The car merged into traffic, city lights rushing past like sparks. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my chief financial officer. Sir, he said, voice tight with urgency, the Singapore acquisition just cleared. We're officially the majority stakeholder. I closed my eyes briefly. Another billion added. Another headline that wouldn't carry my face. Good, I replied. Schedule the board call for morning. Yes, sir. The line went dead. I leaned back and exhaled slowly, the hum of the city wrapping around me like a low drumbeat. Upstairs in that apartment, she was telling her friends she was finally free of the man who held her back. And tonight, of all nights, she believed it. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Because 5 years later, the truth. The breakup didn't happen in a dramatic explosion. No shouting. No slammed doors. No final argument that echoed down the hallway. That would have been easier. Instead, it happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind that feels harmless until it rewrites your life. She sat across from me at the small dining table, sunlight spilling through the window, dust floating in the air like everything was suspended in time. She didn't look angry. That was the first sign. I've been thinking, she said, folding her hands together carefully, like she was handling something fragile. I nodded. I already knew. When you live quietly, you learn to listen to silence. I just feel like I'm stuck, she continued. And I don't think you're going anywhere. There it was. Not cruel. Not loud. Just precise. She talked about ambition. About momentum. About needing a partner who matched her energy. She said she wanted more out of life. More excitement, more visibility, more certainty. She never asked what I was building. She assumed nothing was there. I let her. At the time, my days didn't look impressive. I woke early. I worked late. I traveled under aliases, through holding companies, meeting people who never used my real name. My wealth wasn't in bank accounts you brag about. It was locked in structures, investments, long-term plays. To her, it looked like procrastination. To me, it was patience. But patience doesn't impress someone who's already halfway out the door. I don't want to wake up at 40 and realize I chose safety over success, she said softly. I almost laughed. Not because she was wrong, but because she was standing 3 feet away from a man who had already crossed that finish line and decided it didn't matter. I asked her one question. Is there someone else? She hesitated. That told me everything. She moved out 2 weeks later. Fast, clean, efficient. She took her clothes, her books, her confidence. She left behind a space that felt too quiet too quickly. The story she told afterwards spread even faster. He was nice, but he never pushed himself. I didn't see a future. People repeated it because it made sense. The world loves simple explanations. What they didn't know was that the breakup forced a decision I'd been avoiding. Not about money. About identity. For years I'd lived like a shadow on purpose. I believed anonymity protected the people I cared about. That being unseen was safer than being admired. But being unseen has a cost. It lets people rewrite you. And sometimes, it lets them discard you without hesitation. Still, I didn't correct the narrative. Not when mutual friends stopped calling. Not when her social media shifted from subtle sadness to loud reinvention. Not when I overheard someone refer to me as the poor ex at a cafe and laughed like it was a fact. I let the lie live. Because lies have weight. And I wanted to see how long it would carry. A month after she left, I got the notification. Final notice, rent overdue. Not addressed to me. But forwarded. Someone had typed the wrong email. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. She had never struggled financially when we were together. But she had upgraded fast. Nicer place, better neighborhood, higher expectations. The new men in her life promised excitement. None promised stability. I could have ignored it. Most people would have. But I remembered something she once said years ago lying next to me in the dark. I just want to feel safe, she whispered. Even if everything else falls apart. So I paid the rent. Not directly. Never directly. I used a property management intermediary. No name. No trace. Just consistency. 1 month became 2. 2 became 6. 6 became a year. She never asked where the money came from. She assumed the universe was being kind. Meanwhile, my world accelerated. Deals closed. Markets shifted. My net worth crossed thresholds people dream about. I attended meetings where men twice my age argued over numbers that could change countries. I signed papers that decided the future of thousands of employees. And every month, on the same day, I paid rent for a woman who believed I had nothing. There was something grounding about it. A reminder that money is loud, but intention is quiet. By year 2, she had rebuilt herself. New job. New confidence. New circle. She laughed more in public. Posted more. Spoke about growth, like she invented it. I watched from a distance, never interfering, never correcting. Because the lie had grown bigger than either of us. And when lies grow that large, they collapse loudly. What she didn't realize was that every quiet month of support was tightening the story. Every payment was a thread. And 5 years later, when they all pulled at once, the truth would rip straight through the illusion she had built. Would come out. And when it did, the laughter would stop. Silence is uncomfortable for most people. They mistake it for weakness. They confuse restraint with fear. They assume if you don't defend yourself, you have nothing worth defending. I learned early that silence does something far more dangerous. It lets people expose who they really are. After the breakup, I watched the story spread without me lifting a finger. It traveled through friend groups, offices, parties, dinners I no longer attended. It became cleaner each time it was repeated, simpler, sharper, easier to swallow. He never had drive. She carried him. He was holding her back. No one asked me if it was true. They didn't need to. The version of me they saw made the story believable. I didn't dress like money. I didn't speak like ambition. I didn't chase attention. So the lie found fertile ground. And I let it grow. There's a strange freedom in being underestimated. When people think you're small, they stop watching you closely. When they believe you've already lost, they stop guarding themselves. I was invited to fewer events, but the conversations around me became honest. People spoke openly, careless with their words, certain I had no leverage. I listened. I learned who valued appearances over loyalty, who confused noise for competence, who measured worth by visible success alone. The same people who dismissed me were the ones who later pitched my companies, never realizing who sat across from them in boardrooms under a different name. I never corrected them. I let them talk. Meanwhile, my ex leaned into the narrative. Not aggressively. Not cruelly. Just enough. She'd tell stories at gatherings, light jokes about dating, potential, and how she'd learned her lesson. She framed herself as the survivor of a quiet disappointment. People nodded. They sympathized. And every time my absence became proof. If I were truly something, wouldn't I have said something by now? That's how they justified it. By the second year, she no longer thought about me often. That's the thing about moving on, it requires forgetting. She built a life that looked successful from the outside. Not extravagant but curated. Her confidence returned because people around her reinforced the story she wanted to believe. That she'd made the right choice. That leaving me was growth. And I paid the rent quietly as she slept under that belief. People assume paying someone's rent for years is about attachment. It wasn't. It was about control, not over her but over myself. I needed to know that my decisions weren't driven by bitterness. That I could be generous without being visible. That I could give without being owed. Each payment was a test. Of restraint. Of ego. Of discipline. Because nothing tempts ego more than correcting a lie that hurts. By year 3, my wealth had multiplied beyond my original projections. I owned stakes in infrastructure, finance, logistics, technology, systems that moved quietly but shaped entire cities. I could have ended the story with one phone call. One reveal. One headline. One photo. But power revealed too early loses its edge. I wanted the truth to arrive on its own terms. The irony was painful and fascinating. The more invisible I stayed, the more confident everyone became in the lie. Her friends joked openly about me at parties I wasn't invited to. Some said I'd probably never recovered from the breakup. Others speculated I was still struggling. They never considered the opposite. Because the world rarely expects greatness from quiet men. At some point she met someone serious. Not flashy. Not loud. Comfortable. He fit her new life well. And for the first time since the breakup I felt relief. Because the story no longer needed tension to survive. It had settled. And settled stories are the most dangerous, because no one questions them anymore. Year 4 passed. Then year 5. The rent payments continued without interruption. On time. Anonymous. Invisible. She never traced them back to me. Why would she? The man she believed I was couldn't afford consistency. Then came the invitation. Not to a party. To a charity gala. My foundation, quiet, intentionally detached from my name, was a major donor. Attendance wasn't required, but something told me to go. I went alone. No entourage. No announcement. Just a man in a tailored suit, unrecognized, unremarkable. Until my name appeared on the screen. I didn't see her at first. I heard the silence. That collective pause when wealth becomes real. Not rumored, not imagined, but undeniable. I felt eyes turn. Whispers rise. And then I saw her. Frozen. Her face draining of color as pieces rearranged themselves violently in her mind. The poor ex. The anonymous payments. The years of luck. All colliding. That was the moment silence paid its final dividend. Because the truth didn't need me to explain it. It explained itself. The room didn't go silent all at once. Silence crept in. It started at the stage, where the host paused just half a second longer than necessary, eyes flicking between the teleprompter and the audience as if even he needed time to process the name he was about to say. Then it spread outward. Tables stopped clinking. Conversations thinned into whispers. People straightened in their seats. I stood near the back of the hall, hands loosely folded, posture relaxed. To anyone watching, I looked like a man waiting for nothing. The host cleared his throat. Tonight's principal benefactor, he announced, voice steady but suddenly respectful, is the founder and majority stakeholder of. My name appeared on the screen behind him. Not just my name. The companies. The acquisitions. The valuations. Numbers that didn't need explanation. The room inhaled sharply. That was when I felt it, the shift. The moment perception breaks. I didn't look for her. I didn't need to. I felt her recognition hit me like a wave. There's a specific kind of stillness that happens when someone realizes they've been wrong for a very long time. Not surprised. Not shocked. Rewritten. I turned my head slowly. She stood near the edge of the hall, holding a tray she'd forgotten to put down. Her fingers had gone white around the metal, knuckles locked as if she needed something solid to stay upright. Her eyes were on the screen. Then they moved to me. And stopped. For a heartbeat she didn't blink. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her shoulders tensed, then dropped. I saw 5 years play across her face in seconds. The jokes. The stories. The confidence. The rent payments that always arrived on time. Her world didn't shatter loudly. It cracked quietly. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as people recalibrated their reactions. Wealth demands acknowledgement even when it's inconvenient. I stepped forward only when the host gestured for me. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. Not because of nerves, because of memory. I passed people who had once dismissed me, eyes now bright with sudden interest. Some smiled too fast. Others avoided eye contact entirely. I stepped onto the stage and nodded once. No speech prepared. No rehearsed humility. Just truth standing where silence had been. Thank you, I said simply, for supporting something that matters. That was all. No explanation. No correction. The truth didn't need decoration. When I stepped back into the crowd, the room buzzed differently. People leaned closer to each other. Names were whispered. Assumptions unraveled. And then she moved. Not toward the stage. Toward me. She stopped a few feet away, breath uneven, eyes searching my face like she was afraid it might disappear. Was it you? She asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I met her gaze calmly. The rent, she said quickly, words tumbling now. All those years. The payments. Was it you? I didn't smile. I didn't look away. I nodded once. Her face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just inward. Tears welled, unscheduled and unwelcome, her composure abandoning her without permission. I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know. I know, I replied. That hurt her more than anger would have. She looked around, suddenly aware of the room again, of eyes, of whispers, of how public this moment was becoming. I told people, she began, then stopped. I waited. I told them you had nothing, she said, voice breaking. That you were stuck. That I left because you weren't going anywhere. I nodded again. That was easier to believe, I said quietly. She swallowed hard. Why didn't you say something? She asked. Why didn't you tell me? Because this question always comes. From people who mistake explanation for obligation. I wasn't hiding, I said. I was building. Her shoulders shook. I would never have left, she whispered, desperation slipping into her voice now. If I had known. That was when I stopped her. Gently. But firmly. If you needed to know, I said, then you didn't need me. The words landed heavy. Not cruel. Final. She covered her mouth, nodding through tears, the truth settling in slowly and painfully. Around us the gala continued. Music resumed. Conversations restarted. But for her time had stalled. I'm sorry, she said. I was wrong. I know, I replied again. And I meant it. Because regret always arrives late. She stepped back, unsure what to do next, and finally whispered, I never meant to hurt you. I looked at her then, not as an ex, not as a symbol, but as a person who made a human mistake. I believe you, I said. But belief doesn't rewrite decisions. She nodded, tears falling freely now. And then she walked away. I stayed. Not out of triumph. Out of closure. Because the truth hadn't arrived to punish. It arrived to end the story. Later that night, alone in the car, the city sliding past the windows again, my phone buzzed. A message from my CFO. Press is circling. They're asking about your past. I looked out at the lights. Let them wonder, I said. The past doesn't need commentary. I hung up. 5 years of silence had done its work. And from that moment on, nothing needed explaining. The night didn't end with applause. That's the part people don't understand. There was no dramatic exit. No whispered cheers following me out the door, no cinematic freeze frame of justice served. The gala continued the way all public events do, awkwardly normal, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something had shifted. Not loudly. Irreversibly. By morning, the story had already started mutating. Not the truth, never the truth, but the interpretation of it. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered my name. Old acquaintances resurfaced in my inbox, their messages carefully neutral, pretending time hadn't passed. Always knew you had something special. So inspiring to see quiet success. Would love to reconnect. I didn't respond. Because reconnection without honesty is just curiosity wearing politeness. She didn't reach out again. Not that day. Not that week. And I respected that. What people don't realize is that shame has weight. It presses inward, silencing even the bravest voices. When someone realizes they misjudged not just a person, but their own values, it leaves them unsure where to stand. She had built her confidence on a story that collapsed overnight. Not because I exposed it, but because it couldn't survive the truth. A mutual friend told me later that she left the city not long after. Not in disgrace. Just quietly. Changed jobs. Moved neighborhoods. Started over again. That's what people do when the mirror shows them something they weren't ready to see. The rent payments stopped. Not because I cut them off. Because she didn't need them anymore. That was the irony. She had finally reached stability on her own, 5 years too late to matter to the story. I felt relief when I saw the final cancellation notice. Not because it ended, but because it ended cleanly. People assume closure feels like satisfaction. It doesn't. Feels like stillness. A strange calm that arrives after tension has lived in your body for too long. For 5 years, part of me had been braced, waiting for a moment I claimed I didn't need. And when it finally passed, there was nothing left to hold on to. No anger. No pride. No hunger for validation. Just space. My work intensified after that. Not because I needed distraction, but because clarity creates momentum. Without the weight of that unfinished chapter, decisions came faster. Sharper. Cleaner. I made acquisitions I'd delayed. Exited partnerships that no longer aligned. Moved capital toward long-term systems instead of reactive plays. People started noticing me differently now. They listened more closely. Laughed less casually. Measured their words. And that, too, felt strange. Because respect given too late always carries a shadow. One afternoon, months later, I ran into someone from her old circle. They looked uncomfortable. I didn't know, they said almost immediately. About you. About everything. I know, I replied. They hesitated. She talks about that night sometimes, they added. Not in detail. Just as a lesson. I nodded. That was enough. Regret is often misunderstood. People think it's about wishing you could change the past. It's not. It's about realizing the past already changed you, and you didn't notice until it was done. She didn't regret leaving me. She regretted why she left. And that distinction matters. I never told anyone about the rent. Not publicly. Not privately. It wasn't a story meant for applause. It was a personal discipline. A reminder that generosity doesn't require recognition, and that doing the right thing quietly is harder than doing it loudly. If I had wanted credit, I would have revealed myself the first month. But credit would have cheapened it. There was a moment, late one night, when I wondered what would have happened if I'd told her everything before she left. If I'd explained the companies, the wealth, the future. Would she have stayed? Almost certainly. But that version of staying would have been built on information, not belief. On security, not trust. And that wouldn't have been love. It would have been alignment with advantage. That realization settled something deep inside me. I didn't lose anything 5 years ago. I gained clarity. I learned that silence filters intentions better than words ever could. That people reveal their values when they think no one important is watching. And that the right partner doesn't need proof of potential, only consistency of character. The world eventually moved on. New stories replaced mine. New dramas took center stage. That's how it always works. But the lesson remained, with me and with her. Just not shared. Some truths aren't meant to be viral. They're meant to be internal. Years later, when people ask how I built everything so steadily, I give them a simple answer. I stopped explaining myself, I say, because once you do that, you find out who was listening for you, and who was only listening for what you could offer. It happened in the most unremarkable way possible. No gala. No spotlight. No dramatic coincidence. Just a Tuesday evening, a quiet restaurant, and a conversation that didn't feel like an interview. Her name wasn't important at first. What mattered was how little she seemed interested in what I was, and how deeply curious she was about how I thought. We were seated next to each other at the bar, both waiting for tables that were running late. She smiled politely, then went back to her book. No second glance. No subtle scanning of my clothes, my watch, my posture. That alone caught my attention. Most people evaluate first, then decide how to behave. She simply existed. When the bartender apologized for the delay, she laughed softly and said, "At least it's not raining." I smiled. Give it time. She closed her book and turned toward me. You always expect storms? Only when things feel too calm, I replied. She considered that, then nodded. Fair. That was it. No flirtation. No performance. Just recognition. We talked because it felt natural to do so. About work, but not titles. About cities, but not property values. About ambition, but not money. She asked questions that didn't lead anywhere strategic. Questions people ask when they're genuinely curious, not gathering data. What do you enjoy about your days? What's something you stopped chasing on purpose? What do you protect your time from? No one had asked me those things in years. Most dates felt like negotiations disguised as charm. People searching for indicators, trying to measure upside. She wasn't measuring. She was listening. When her table was ready, she stood and said, "This was unexpectedly pleasant." Unexpected. That word lingered. She didn't ask what I did. Didn't suggest exchanging contacts. She simply thanked me for the conversation and walked away. I watched her go, not with desire but with curiosity. Because for the first time in a long while, I felt seen without being examined. We met again weeks later. Same restaurant. Same ease. This time I asked her to stay. She agreed without hesitation. Over dinner, I learned she valued independence fiercely, not as a shield but as a standard. She had built her life deliberately without borrowing identity from anyone else. She didn't need to be rescued. That was important. I didn't tell her who I was. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to see how long the connection could exist without context. And it did. Easily. We met for walks. For coffee. For long conversations that wandered without agenda. She never pressed for explanations. She never tried to decode me. She accepted me as present. That kind of acceptance is rare. When she eventually learned the truth, it wasn't a reveal. It was an accident. A name mentioned casually at a conference we attended separately. A quiet pause. A look of recognition. Later that evening she asked calmly, "Is that you?" I nodded. She absorbed it silently. Then she said something I'll never forget. "That explains your patience," she said. "Not your value. No surprise. No recalibration. Just continuity." That was the moment I understood something I hadn't before. The right person doesn't react to your success. They contextualize it. They see wealth as information, not identity. Dating after silence had taught me hard lessons. That money amplifies expectations. That transparency invites entitlement. That admiration can masquerade as affection. But she didn't admire. She respected. And respect is quieter. We spoke once later about my past, not in detail but enough. I told her about the years of silence. About being underestimated. About the discipline of restraint. I didn't mention the rent. Some stories don't need retelling. She listened carefully, then said, "You never corrected them, did you?" "No," I replied. She nodded slowly. That must have been lonely. It was the first time anyone had named that truth. Not framed it as strategy. Not praised it as strength. Just acknowledged the cost. Loneliness doesn't always look like isolation. Sometimes it looks like being surrounded by people who think they know you. She understood that. And because she did, I trusted her. Our relationship didn't change my life dramatically. It refined it. I didn't become softer. I became clearer. I didn't slow down. I became more selective. She didn't ask for time I couldn't give. She valued the time I chose to give freely. That difference is everything. Years later, when people ask how I learned to choose well, I tell them this. Watch who stays consistent before they know the full picture. Because attraction can be sparked by mystery. But loyalty is born in uncertainty. She never asked about the gala. Never asked about my ex. Never asked about public perception. She wasn't interested in stories that no longer mattered. She cared about the man in front of her, unexplained, unfinished, and present. And that was enough. For the first time since I'd chosen silence, I didn't feel like I was withholding. I felt like I was sharing. Not facts, but life. Power reveals people faster than poverty ever could. I've seen it happen in boardrooms, in relationships, in quiet private moments when no one is watching. Give a person leverage, money, influence, authority, and they show you exactly who they are. Some grow loud. Some grow careless. Some mistake visibility for importance. I learned early that power carried loudly attracts the wrong kind of attention. Power carried quietly attracts clarity. For years, people assumed my silence was insecurity. They thought I lacked confidence because I didn't announce myself. That I stayed invisible because I was afraid of scrutiny. The truth was simpler. I understood what exposure costs. The moment people know what you're worth, they stop listening to who you are. Every interaction becomes transactional. Every kindness becomes suspect. Every disagreement feels strategic. Silence protected my humanity. I watched others rise fast and burn faster. Men who needed to be seen. Who confused admiration with loyalty. Who surrounded themselves with people who agreed too quickly. They chased validation and called it leadership. And when the applause faded, as it always does, they were left alone, confused by the emptiness they mistook for success. I didn't want that life. The years I spent underestimated were not wasted years. They were training. I learned how to observe without reacting. How to absorb insult without internalizing it. How to let people project onto me without correcting them. That discipline carried into everything. Negotiations. Partnerships. Well, when you don't need to prove yourself, you don't make desperate decisions. The gala wasn't a victory. It was a conclusion. A final punctuation mark on a chapter that no longer needed revisiting. People thought the reveal changed me. It didn't. It only changed how others behaved. That distinction matters. After that night, opportunities multiplied, not because I became more capable but because perception shifted. People suddenly believed in what I had already built. I found that fascinating. Nothing about my work had changed. Only the story around it. And that confirmed something I'd always suspected. Most people don't respond to truth. They respond to consensus. The woman I loved understood this instinctively. She once said, "Real power doesn't enter rooms loudly. It enters and waits." That sentence stayed with me. Because waiting requires confidence. Only insecure power demands immediate recognition. I stopped correcting people altogether after that. Not out of indifference. Out of intention. If someone misunderstood me, I let them. If they underestimated me, I noted it. If they judged me by appearances, I adjusted my expectations of them, not my behavior. Life becomes simpler when you stop auditioning for understanding. I thought about my ex occasionally, not with bitterness but with distance. She was not a villain. She was a mirror. She reflected the part of the world that equates worth with visibility and security with status. She made a reasonable choice based on incomplete information. And that was the lesson. People don't betray you because they're cruel. They betray you because they're afraid. Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of waiting too long. Afraid of being left behind. If I had announced my wealth earlier, I would have kept her. But I would have lost myself. Because love that depends on advantage is not partnership. It's alignment with convenience. And convenience disappears the moment conditions change. The woman who stayed, the one who didn't ask, she never treated my power like a prize. She treated it like a responsibility. She reminded me gently when my world threatened to narrow into numbers and strategies. She grounded me without shrinking me. That balance is rare. And it only works when power is carried with humility. Humility is misunderstood. It's not self-denial. It's accuracy. Knowing exactly who you are, and refusing to exaggerate it. I now teach younger leaders one thing above all else. Let people underestimate you early. It gives you room to grow without pressure, without performance, without noise. It teaches you patience, discernment, and restraint. Most importantly, it shows you who respects you when there's nothing to gain. The world rewards loud success quickly, but it rewards quiet success permanently. And permanence matters more than applause. One evening, long after the gala was forgotten by everyone else, I stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Lights stretched endlessly. Towers rose like monuments to ambition. I thought about the man I had been standing in the rain years ago, soaked, dismissed, misunderstood. And I felt no urge to correct the memory. Because that man didn't lose. He was becoming. Silence had been my teacher. And power, real power, was the lesson. There's a version of this story people expect. One where the man gets the last laugh. Where regret kneels publicly. Where success tastes like revenge. That's not this story. Because the truth is quieter than that. Years after the gala, no one mentions it anymore. Not the donors. Not the press. Not the people who once leaned in too eagerly when my name became useful. The world moves on quickly once novelty fades. And that's exactly how it should be. I didn't build what I built to be remembered for a moment. I built it to last beyond attention. Sometimes I think about the night in the rain, the man standing outside an apartment building, labeled, dismissed, misunderstood. People imagine that version of me must have felt small. He didn't. He felt clear. Clear about who he was. Clear about what mattered. Clear about what he refused to trade for approval. That clarity carried him through 5 years of silence. And silence, when chosen, is not absence. It's preparation. The world is full of quiet men like that. Men who don't announce their worth. who don't rush timelines to keep someone comfortable, who don't inflate themselves just to be chosen. They are overlooked, not because they lack value, but because they don't advertise it. And the world has grown impatient with depth. I see them now. In meetings where they sit back and listen while louder voices compete for space. In relationships where they give consistency instead of fireworks. In lives built deliberately, brick by brick, without applause. They are the men people leave too early. Not because they were wrong, but because they required faith. Faith is expensive. It asks you to wait. To trust process over appearances. To believe without proof. Most people don't want that. They want reassurance now. And that's why they mistake noise for momentum and visibility for security. I don't resent my ex. Resentment assumes imbalance. What I feel is understanding. She chose certainty over character because certainty feels safer when you're afraid of standing still. She didn't leave a bad man. She left an unfinished story. And unfinished stories make people nervous. The woman who stayed, the one who didn't ask, she once said something that quietly sealed everything for me. People who need proof of value, she said, are usually afraid of discovering their own. She wasn't judging. She was observing. Life with her isn't dramatic. It's grounded. It's laughter without performance. Support without possession. Respect without fear. She doesn't walk beside me because of where I stand. She walks beside me because she knows how I walk. That difference is everything. If there's a message in all of this, it isn't about wealth. Money was just the backdrop. The story is about discernment. About how people choose, and why. About what happens when you let others believe what they want instead of interrupting them with explanations. Because explanations don't build trust. Time does. I don't advise people to hide who they are. But I do advise them not to rush the reveal. Let people show you how they decide. Let them tell you without words what they value. Because the way someone treats you before they know your full worth is how they truly see you. Every so often, someone asks if I'd do it differently. If I'd speak up sooner. If I'd correct the lie. I always give the same answer. No. Because silence didn't cost me love. It filtered it. The world didn't miss out on me. It simply revealed who was never meant to stay. And that's not loss. That's alignment. So if you're watching this and you feel unseen, if you're building quietly while others chase attention, if you've been underestimated, labeled, dismissed, let them. Do not rush to correct a story that hasn't finished unfolding. The truth doesn't need defending. It needs time. Because one day, without warning, without drama, without explanation, the truth walks into the room. And when it does, it doesn't shout. It stands. If this story resonated with you, subscribe. Not for noise, not for hype, but for stories about quiet strength, unseen discipline, and power that doesn't need permission to exist. New stories every week. Real lessons. No exaggeration. Subscribe, and stay with the ones who understand silence.